So welcome back to the Raisina Fireside Chat, and this time we are delighted to welcome Admiral John Aquilino, Commander of the US Indo-Pacific Command. He is here to speak at the big session tomorrow morning, and I am honored to have him with me today for a conversation on something perhaps that he won't be asked out there. So welcome to the Raisina Dialogue, Admiral.
Thank you, Samir. It's good to be back in India. I was just here a few months ago, and it's wonderful to be back to see some friends. It's very important for the relationship for the Indo-PACOM commander to participate, to highlight the security interests of both the United States and India. I was lucky enough to host Minister Singh and Secretary Kumar just last week on their return from the 2+2. They were joined by Prime Minister Modi as well as President Biden virtually, and that effort was designed to highlight the importance of our bilateral relationship and the importance of the security of this region.
Admiral, in your assessment, what has changed in the last 2-3 years? Now, there have been turbulence from the Himalayas to the Hindu Kush, from Black Sea to the Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal. How is the security landscape different today?
Well, it's extremely different, as you've seen. First, it's obvious that the Russia invasion illegitimately of Ukraine has changed the environment. Second, the declaration by the PRC as it applies to the Ukraine with the term of no limits between the relationship. And I think what that describes is a security environment that's probably one of the most dangerous we've seen in our time.
And you're also seeing PRC activity around Taiwan, and that's directly under your command, that area. How has that changed in its character in the recent past?
So as it applies to Taiwan, we've seen increased pressure from the PRC in both the air and maritime domain, as well as the informational domain, to work towards ultimately a coercion campaign.
Admiral, with all that is happening in the world, and perhaps even the responsibility on the US to be a significant actor in what's going on in Europe, is there political capital, is there enough space available for developing, strengthening, and taking forward the Indo-Pacific strategy, which is still nascent, which is still young and new?
Yes, Samir, I think the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy based on the events and activities in the region actually validate the strategy. It obviously highlighted the PRC as the priority security challenge and strategic competitor for the United States, as well as Russia as an acute threat. And we are seeing activities in the region that validate that strategy. I think it also highlights the importance of the U.S.-India relationship, as well as the multilateral relationships of AUKUS, the Quad, trilateral relationship between the United States, Japan, and Korea, as well as our 5 security alliances in the region. Those are much more important. What we've watched in the European theater is a coming together of like-minded nations in the form of NATO in order to work to prevent and ultimately to deter conflict and an expanse of the current war. That same need is required in the Pacific. Like-minded nations with common values, common interests. It'll be very important for us to continue to work together in order to deter any threats.
So there are 2 questions that come to mind when we now talk about the scenarios, the threat scenarios in this particular region. The first is, do you think we will be able to mobilize? Like, for example, you saw the mobilization in Europe vis-a-vis the Ukraine war. Do you think you have the ingredients in place to be able to respond to a highly expansive, aggressive power in the region? Do you have the partnerships and the friendships that are required to make that count in the region? That's the first part. The second part is, you're also seeing from the same conflict in Ukraine, how asymmetry is in some ways being, being made less important by using smart, innovative battlefield technologies, battlefield strategies. Um, and are we seeing some of those um, uh, various new warfare or security measures being deployed in your region as well? Is that big fleet, big army, big navy, big air force mantra in need of a new avatar?
I think the implementation of the strategy, as we define it and the Secretary has defined it, is through this lens of integrated deterrence. And that is the utilization of all forms of national power, synchronized with the U.S. joint force through all domains and linked with our allies and partners operating together. I think that's foundational for what it will take in the Indo-Pacific to execute that deterrence function. The key aspect is obviously the allies and partners. So our operations day to day, over 120 exercises per year, utilizing all forms of technology to drive interoperability and to allow us to be able to quickly come together in order to support each other in times, whether it be competition or whether we get driven into crisis.
And how do you respond to the informal quasi-state militias who are swarming boats on the seas, who are creating a new security dynamic? How do responsible states who are accountable to people, who have constitutions that they need to live by, how do they respond to this new kind of threat that modern day armies and navies are going to have to respond to? I mean, there are reports that Chinese militia regularly swarm boats on the seas, whether it's the Indian boats of Vietnam or the American boats in different parts of the seas. How do you respond to that challenge?
Well, we'll see. We're seeing the PRC using all forms of their national power to drive their objectives, which are counter to the rules-based international order, international law, and those fishing boats are just one aspect of it. There's informational space work, there's economic coercion, there's diplomatic efforts to change the status quo. Again, I think when the United States and all of our like-minded allies and partners come together to ensure we can sustain that international rules-based order, which has benefited all nations for 80 years. It's driven the highest level of prosperity in this region across the Indo-Pacific. It gives all nations a voice through international law to be able to get to a successful conclusion for disputes peacefully. That's the target, and that's what we should be all working towards.
Admiral, Europe. We have seen a number of individual countries within the Union, and of course even the Union itself, clearly state their intention to be a part of the Indo-Pacific story that's coming up in the future, politically, economically, through the Global Gateway Project, through deployments of fleets as well. How serious, in your assessment, is the role of Europe in this part of the world? What is it that they bring to the region?
Samir, so what I would say is it's already happened. It's not new. The world is obviously globalized, whether it be economics, military. We are in a globalized world. And what I would say is the importance of the Indo-Pacific highlights the importance to the rest of the nation. 2/3 of the global economy passes through the South China Sea. I went to London not long ago and spoke at their Maritime conference, and the message was to highlight the importance of what happens in the Indo-Pacific to the global nations. No one is separated from the importance of this region, and everyone has to understand it. They need to understand that the international rules-based order is responsible for the prosperity globally, not just for the nations in the Indo-Pacific. So that's one of the reasons that we take our role so seriously. That's why we work with our allies and partners, because everything that happens in the Indo-Pacific affects the global nations.
And my final question to you, Admiral. What are your ambitions for the bilateral? We have come a long way, clearly. What are the immediate or the midterm ambitions that you may have on what we need to be doing together?
I think that I've seen the biggest advance in our relationship in the past 3 years. I'd like to credit that first to General Rawat, my good friend, may he rest in peace, with his lovely wife. But his leadership, as well as the leadership of the service chiefs, very, very important to move our relationship forward. We've increased our information sharing. We've increased the capabilities that we both utilize. We've increased and improved our interoperability. We can operate as Quad nations. We can operate in the form of RIMPAC, which is coming up. 27 nations coming together to be interoperable. So we need to continue on that path. Some of that will require technology sharing. We have to do that safely in a cyber secure way. We have to protect those technologies that we want to protect. But I think that our bilateral relationship is on a great trend, and we continue to move it towards a more multilateral set of relationship with the rest of the nations in the region.
So thank you for joining us, Admiral Aquilino. We are going to have a number of conversations this evening and tomorrow on the Quad, on the region, and indeed on the India-US partnership. But I am delighted that we have had a strong partnership with your command. You've attended, the command has been present at 6 of the 7 Raisinas. I always tell my colleagues that this is your base without a fleet. And please treat us as home and keep coming back, and please keep joining the Raisina dialogue.
Thanks, Samir. Again, this is very, very important for me to be here. I'm honored to be able to be on your show. And we'll continue to work together to deliver a free and open Indo-Pacific for all nations. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral.